This story is titled, My Parents Threatened to Cut Me Off If I Didn't Pay My Sister's Debt. I called their bluff and went no contact. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone, been hanging around here for a while, but I've never really shared anything before. I didn't think I'd ever have a reason to, but my family has officially pushed me to my limit. I need to hear what other people think. It feels like no matter what I do, I'm always painted as the bad guy, and honestly, I'm exhausted. So here's what's been going on. I'm 30, male now, and I've been on my own since I was 18. When I say on my own, I mean it. Financially, emotionally, you name it. My parents? Let's just say they're not exactly winning any awards for parenting or sibling support. They weren't the kind of parents who cheered you on or made you feel like you were special. Instead, they had this unspoken rule that shaped my entire childhood. My younger sister, Anna, could do no wrong, while I was expected to be the responsible one. If Anna messed up, and believe me, she messed up a lot, it was brushed under the rug. She's just sensitive, my mom would say. Or, she'll learn eventually, which was code for let's pretend this never happened and hope she figures it out. Meanwhile, if I so much as stumbled, it was like the sky was falling. Why aren't you trying harder? You need to set a better example for your sister. It didn't matter what I did. It was never enough. I could bring home a report card full of A's, and they'd ask why I didn't get an A+ in math. But Anna? She could barely pass, and it was, at least you're doing your best, sweetie. That dynamic didn't stop when we became adults. If anything, it got worse. Anna stayed under my parents' roof until she was in her mid-20s, bouncing from one failed job to the next and always finding some excuse for why it wasn't her fault. Meanwhile, I was out here working 2 part-time jobs to pay my way through college, figuring out how to manage rent and bills on my own. Not once did they offer to help me. Not that I expected them to, but it stung watching them bend over backward for Anna while I was left to fend for myself. Anyway, fast forward to 6 months ago. My mom called me. Now, you have to understand, my mom doesn't call just to chat. She doesn't call to check in or say hi. When she calls, it's because she needs something. You know the kind of call I'm talking about. The one that starts with overly sweet small talk, like they're trying to butter you up before dropping the real reason they're calling. That's exactly what happened. She started with, "How's work? Are you still at that company? Have you been eating well?" It was so out of character that I knew something was coming. My mom doesn't care how I'm eating. She doesn't even know what I do for a living beyond something with computers. The whole conversation felt fake, like she was trying too hard to sound casual. Then she hit me with it. Anna's in trouble. I wasn't surprised. Anna always seems to be in trouble, but I wasn't expecting this. Apparently, Anna had racked up $40,000 in debt, and not the kind of debt you can laugh off as youthful stupidity, like student loans or maxed out credit cards. No, she had borrowed from some seriously shady people, and now they were getting serious about wanting their money back. My mom's voice cracked like she was about to cry, which I'm sure she thought would make me cave. She didn't waste any time piling on the guilt. You've done so well for yourself. You've always been the strong one. Anna's not like you. She needs your help. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. 40 grand? How does someone even manage to rack up that kind of debt? I asked her how it happened, half expecting some ridiculous excuse, and my mom brushed it off. That doesn't matter right now, she said, like I was focusing on the wrong thing. What matters is that she's your sister. Family helps family. That line, family helps family, has been their go-to excuse for years. It's what they said every time they needed me to fix something for Anna, cover for her, or clean up whatever mess she'd made. And every time I'd swallowed my frustration and done what they asked because I didn't want to be the bad guy. But this? $40,000? I couldn't do it. Not this time. I told her no. Straight up. I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't bail Anna out of a mess she created." And just like that, the tone of the conversation shifted. My mom went from pitiful to pissed in about 2 seconds flat. "You're being selfish," she started to yell. "You're abandoning your family when they need you most." She even threw in, "Do you want her blood on your hands?" As if Anna's poor life choices were somehow my responsibility. At that point, I hung up. I couldn't listen to it anymore. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight, but I knew I'd made the right decision. I've worked too hard to let someone else's bad choices drag me down. Still, the guilt started creeping in almost immediately. My family has a way of twisting things to make me feel like the bad guy, and this time was no different. Even though I said no, I can't shake the feeling that maybe I made the wrong call. Standing up to my family felt like the right thing in the moment, but now I'm stuck wondering if I've just made everything worse. What if they're right? What if I'm being selfish? And honestly, I still don't know what's coming next. That call was just the start, and what happened afterward caught me completely off guard. I have a feeling this isn't over, but I'll fill you all in as things unfold. I'll post an update soon. Update 1. Hey guys, so I thought things might cool down for a bit. Maybe she'd stew for a while and then let it go. Turns out I was way off. The drama ramped up hard, and honestly, I wasn't ready for it. It's been a total mess, and I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with it. Let me break it down. So, after I hung up on my mom, things went from bad to worse. I knew she wouldn't let it go, but I wasn't prepared for the sheer level of guilt tripping and harassment that followed. My phone was blowing up constantly. First, it was my mom with texts like, "We raised you better than this," and "You'll regret turning your back on your family." Then my dad jumped in with his 2 cents, even though he's usually the silent type. His messages were short and to the point, like, "You're better than this," or "Do the right thing." But Anna? Oh, Anna went all out. She sent me this long, whiny text about how her life was falling apart and how she didn't deserve to be abandoned. She threw in stuff like, "I've always looked up to you, and now you're just leaving me to suffer?" And, "You're rich. It's not like $40,000 would even make a dent for you." That made me laugh, Rich. Let me tell you, just because I'm not living paycheck to paycheck doesn't mean I'm swimming in cash. The entitlement in her tone was unbelievable. I didn't reply to any of them. I thought maybe if I ignored it, they'd realize I wasn't going to budge and just let it go. A couple of days later, I got a call from my aunt. She's one of the few family members I actually get along with. So I picked up. She sounded awkward, like she didn't want to be making the call, but felt like she had to. She said my mom had been telling everyone in the family that I was refusing to help Anna and that I was letting her sink. According to my mom, Anna's life was in danger, and I was just standing by watching it happen. My aunt didn't believe all of it, but she wanted to hear my side. I explained the whole situation, including the part where Anna got herself into this mess and expected me to magically fix it. My aunt was shocked but supportive. She told me I wasn't wrong to say no, and that Anna needed to face the consequences of her actions. Hearing that helped a little, but the damage was already done. My mom had spread the story far and wide, twisting it to make me look like the villain. I started getting texts from cousins, uncles, and even a couple of old family friends. Most of them were vague, like, "You should really think about what family means," or "You'll regret this one day." Some were outright nasty. One of my cousins called me selfish and said I was acting like I was too good for the family. I ignored them all, but the constant barrage was exhausting. And then things escalated. One afternoon, I got a call from my bank. At first, I thought it was a scam because who actually gets calls from their bank? But the guy on the line explained that someone had tried to access my accounts using fake identification. They flagged it as suspicious because the documents didn't match up. And thankfully, nothing was taken. I immediately knew who was behind it. Anna. It had to be her. She was desperate. And if she was willing to drag the entire family into this, why wouldn't she try to steal from me? I asked the bank for more details, but they couldn't tell me much other than that they'd locked my accounts temporarily as a precaution. I thanked them and hung up, but I was furious. This wasn't just guilt tripping or emotional manipulation anymore. This was criminal. I need answers, so I am thinking of confronting Anna directly. What would you guys do if you were in my place? Thanks for sticking around. I'll keep you updated. Update 2. Hey again. Y'all been waiting for the confrontation news. Sorry for being late. Hear how it went. After I decided to confront Anna, I was still fuming when I pulled up to her apartment later that evening. I hadn't told her I was coming, and honestly, I wasn't even sure what I was going to say. All I knew was that I needed to look her in the eye and hear her admit what she'd done. Maybe a part of me hoped she'd deny it. Give me some reason to believe my sister wasn't the type of person who'd stoop this low. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me, but not in a "what are you doing here" kind of way. It was more like she'd been expecting me to show up eventually. She was wearing sweats, and her hair was a mess, like she'd just rolled out of bed. Not that I cared about her appearance, but it added to the whole vibe of, I don't have my life together. "What are you doing here?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe like this was some casual visit. I didn't even bother easing into it. "Did you try to steal from me?" I asked, holding up my phone with the bank alert still on the screen. My voice was probably louder than it needed to be, but I couldn't help it. I was pissed. Her face froze for a second, and I thought, maybe she'll lie. Maybe she'll try to deny it. But no. Instead, she rolled her eyes like I was overreacting and said, "Oh, come on. You weren't going to help me, so what choice did I have?" What? Choice? The did she have? I stared at her, dumbfounded. Do you even hear yourself? You tried to steal from me because I wouldn't bail you out of your own mess. That's not just wrong, Anna. That's illegal. She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like we were talking about borrowing a sweater or something. Mom and Dad said you'd come around eventually, she said, crossing her arms. They told me to push you harder, that you'd cave if I made it serious enough. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've got to be kidding me, I said. They encouraged you to do this? To commit fraud? Do you even realize how insane that sounds? They didn't tell me to commit fraud, she said. They just said you wouldn't let me sink if you thought I was really in trouble. And guess what? I am in trouble. I don't have anyone else to turn to. I was so angry I could barely think straight. You don't have anyone else to turn to because you've burned every bridge you've ever had, I shouted. This isn't just about the money, Anna. It's about the fact that you've never taken responsibility for anything in your life. And now you're dragging me into your mess because you're too selfish to deal with the consequences of your own actions. She didn't even flinch. You're being dramatic, waving me off. It's not like I actually got anything from you. The bank stopped it, didn't they? So what's the big deal? The big deal, I said, is that you tried. The big deal is that you thought you had the right to steal from me just because you're too lazy to clean up your own mess. And the even bigger deal is that Mom and Dad think this is okay. That finally seemed to get under her skin. Her face twisted into this mix of anger and embarrassment, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? She spat. Just because you've got your fancy job and your stupid house, you think you can sit there and judge me? Well, guess what, big brother? You wouldn't be where you are without Mom and Dad. They sacrificed everything for us, and this is how you repay them? I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when you're so frustrated you don't know what else to do. Mom and Dad didn't sacrifice anything for me, I said. I paid rent at 18. I put myself through college. Every sacrifice they made was for you, Anna. They handed you everything on a silver platter while I was left to figure things out on my own. So don't even try to pull the family loyalty card with me. She didn't have a response to that. Or maybe she did, but she didn't say it out loud. Instead, she just stood there, glaring at me like I was the bad guy in all of this. I couldn't take it anymore. You know what? I said, stepping back toward the door. I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with Mom and Dad. And I'm done with this entire toxic family dynamic. You want to ruin your shitty life? Fine. But you're not taking me down with you. I left before she could say anything else. On the drive home, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles were white. I was angry, sure. But more than that, I was hurt. Not just by Anna, but by my parents too. How could they think this was okay? How could they justify encouraging her to pull something like this? When I got home, I sat down and made a list of all the things I needed to do to protect myself. I called my bank to double-check that my accounts were secure. I changed all my passwords. I even called a lawyer friend to ask what my options were if Anna tried something like this again. He told me I could press charges if I wanted to, but I wasn't ready to go that far. Yet. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. But deep down, I knew the truth. No matter what I said or did, Anna wouldn't change. And as long as my parents kept enabling her, she'd never have to. After the confrontation with Anna, I thought things couldn't get worse. I mean, how much lower could they sink? Turns out I underestimated my family's talent for making bad situations even worse. It started about a week later. My parents showed up at my house. No call, no text, just them standing on my porch like they owned the place. I debated not answering the door, but I figured they'd just keep ringing the bell until I caved. So, I opened it. My mom didn't even bother with a greeting. She shoved past me like she was entitled to be there, her face red with anger. My dad followed her inside, looking uncomfortable, but clearly there to back her up. I closed the door, took a deep breath, and braced myself. This has gone far enough, my mom yelled, spinning around to face me. We need to talk. I crossed my arms. I think we've already said everything that needs to be said. No, we haven't, she said. You need to stop this nonsense and help your sister. She's family. She's your responsibility. I stared at her, absolutely dumbfounded. My responsibility? She got me pissed off. Anna is a grown adult who got herself into this mess. I'm not her parent, and I'm certainly not her ATM. My mom's face twisted in frustration. Do you think we like asking you for help? Do you think this is easy for us? This is about family loyalty. You don't just abandon your family when things get tough. I laughed bitterly. You mean the loyalty you showed when you charged me rent at 18? Or when you made me pay for my own college while Anna got everything handed to her? Or how about when you let her screw up over and over again and just expected me to fix it? Yeah, no thanks. My dad finally spoke up, his voice low and serious. Do you think we've had an easy life, raising 2 kids and trying to give you both the best we could? We sacrificed so much for you. Stop, I said, cutting him off. Just stop. Every sacrifice you made was for Anna. Every time something went wrong, you bent over backward to fix it for her while I had to fend for myself. And you know what? That's fine. I don't need your help, and I never have. But don't stand here and lecture me about loyalty when you've been enabling her bad behavior for years. My mom's face turned bright red, and I could tell she was about to lose it. If you don't help her, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life, she hissed. Do you want her to end up on the streets? Do you want her blood on your hands? And there it was. The same guilt trip she'd tried to pull during that phone call. I felt my blood boiling. I just didn't understand their logic. I'm not responsible for what happens to Anna, I said. She made her choices. If she ends up on the streets, that's on her. And on you for never teaching her how to be accountable for her actions. My mom was practically shaking with rage at this point. Fine, she spat. If this is the kind of person you want to be, don't expect us to be there for you when you need us. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've never needed you, I said coldly. And after this, I never will. For a moment, the room was dead silent. My dad looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. My mom just glared at me, her chest heaving like she was about to explode. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out. My dad followed her, but he paused at the door to give me one last look, a mix of disappointment and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe regret. Then he left too. As soon as the door closed behind them, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I didn't care about their approval or their guilt trips or their toxic idea of family loyalty. I was done. But of course they weren't. The next day I got an email from my mom. It was long and rambling, full of the usual guilt-tripping nonsense. She accused me of being ungrateful and cruel. She said I was abandoning my family in their time of need and that I'd broken her heart. She even hinted that she and my dad might cut me out of their will, like that was supposed to scare me into submission. I didn't respond. What was the point? Then Anna started up again. She sent me this dramatic text about how she was losing everything and how it was all my fault. She said she'd had to sell her car, that she was behind on rent, and that she was being harassed by her creditors. Honestly, I didn't feel bad. She dug her own hole. Now she had to deal with it. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail, not from my family, but from a lawyer. My parents were threatening to sue me. The letter claimed I had a moral obligation to support Anna, and that I'd irreparably harmed the family by refusing to help. It was laughable, really. I forwarded the letter to my own lawyer, who assured me it was complete garbage. They didn't have a leg to stand on, and nothing would come of it. But the fact that they even tried, that was it for me. I was done. Done with Anna, done with my parents, done with the whole toxic family dynamic. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from social media, and told the few relatives I still spoke to that I wasn't interested in hearing anything about my parents or Anna. Most of them understood, though a couple tried to convince me to find a way to make peace. I shut that down real quick. Peace wasn't possible with people who saw me as nothing more than a safety net for Anna's bad decisions. Here where I am right now, I feel miserable. Do you think it's normal for a family to go this far? Final update. Hello again. I decided to write a final update once I figure things out, so here goes. After sending that lawyer's letter straight to the trash and forwarding it to my lawyer just in case, I finally made a decision that had been creeping up on me for years. I was going no contact. Completely. Permanently. I'd been hanging on to some small, fragile hope that my family might change, but the lawyer stunt was proof enough. They weren't going to stop. If anything, they were doubling down on their toxic behavior, and I wasn't going to let them drag me any further into their chaos. So I went full-on block mode. My mom, my dad, Anna, everyone got the chop. Blocked their numbers, their emails, everything. Honestly, hitting that block button felt weirdly good. Then I went through my socials and wiped them off there too. No way was I leaving any doors open for them to sneak back in. I shot a quick text to the few family members I actually like, mostly cousins, letting them know I was done with the family drama and asking them not to play messenger for anyone. Most of them were cool about it. But of course, a couple hit me with the whole, "but they're your family," guilt trip. My response? Short and sweet. Being family doesn't mean you get to treat me like crap. The hardest part was explaining the situation to a few mutual friends who knew my parents. Some of them couldn't believe what I was telling them. Like, they literally couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that my parents and sister had tried to steal from me, guilt me, and now sue me. One friend even asked, "Are you sure there's not more to the story?" As if I'd somehow left out the part where this was all my fault. I felt awful, but I let it go. The people who mattered believed me, and that was enough. The first week of no contact was tough. Not because I missed them, I didn't, but because they didn't give up easily. Even with their numbers blocked, they found ways to get through. My mom started calling from unknown numbers, leaving these long, dramatic voicemails about how I was tearing the family apart. She'd say things like, "We just want to talk," or "You're punishing us for trying to do the right thing." It was exhausting. I didn't listen to most of the messages, just deleted them as soon as I realized who they were from. Then there were the letters. My parents must have gone straight from their lawyer's office to the post office, because the letters started coming almost immediately. At first, they were mostly nonsense. My mom writing pages and pages about how much she sacrificed for me and how I was breaking her heart. My dad chimed in too, though his letters were more direct. One of them actually said, "If you don't help Anna, don't expect us to ever forgive you." Forgive me? For what exactly? For not letting my sister steal from me? For not enabling her bad decisions? The sheer audacity of it was almost funny. By the second week, their messages went completely off the rails. My mom's letters turned desperate, almost unhinged, throwing out vague threats like, "You'll regret this one day," and "You'll be sorry when it's too late." It was all guilt and doom, like she was trying to scare me back into line. My dad, though, he didn't hold back. His letters were straight up venomous, calling me selfish, ungrateful, and arrogant. He ranted about how I'd forgotten where I came from, and was betraying the people who made you who you are. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It felt like they were trying to break me down, like they couldn't handle losing their grip on me. And then there was Anna. Oh, Anna didn't waste any time playing the victim. She sent me this long, handwritten letter, probably because she knew I'd block her emails, saying how much I'd hurt her, how she couldn't believe I'd abandon her in her time of need. She wrote stuff like, "You've always been my rock, and now you're just leaving me to drown." And, "I thought you cared about me, but clearly I was wrong." But I just couldn't believe her audacity. She ended the letter by asking for money again. Not $40,000 this time, just a small loan of $5,000 to help her get back on her feet. She even promised to pay me back as soon as things got better. I laughed so hard I nearly cried, like I was going to fall for that after everything she'd done. But my mom went on full crazy mode by showing up at my office. Yeah, she actually rolled up to my workplace unannounced. She stormed into the lobby, demanding to see me, and when the receptionist wouldn't budge, she lost it. She started yelling loud enough for the whole building to hear, calling me a horrible son, and screaming about how I was destroying the family. Security had to step in and physically escort her out. I stood there watching the whole thing from the mezzanine, completely frozen. My coworkers didn't say a word, but their faces? Pure shock. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. That was it. I'd had enough. I wasn't just mad. I was done. That night, I contacted a family law attorney. Not the friend I'd casually consulted earlier, an actual pro. I laid out everything, the harassment, the entitlement, the insanity. She listened, asked a few sharp questions, and then told me exactly what I needed to do. The next day, we drafted a cease and desist letter. It went out to everyone. My mom, my dad, Anna, even their lawyer. It was crystal clear. Contact me again and I'll take legal action. No exceptions. I didn't think they'd actually stop, but shockingly it worked. My mom's calls? Stopped. The nasty letters? Gone. Even Anna, queen of the guilt trip, went radio silent. Now, 6 months after cutting ties, life feels different. Quieter, lighter, and honestly, better. It wasn't easy, but choosing myself over the constant chaos of my family was the best decision I've ever made. Of course, not everyone gets it. A few relatives still hit me with the same tired line, but they're your family. You know what I say to that? Family doesn't mean squat if they don't respect you. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to wreck your peace. You don't owe anyone, your time, money, or sanity just because you share DNA. Boundaries aren't harsh. They're necessary. And honestly, cutting them off was the best thing I've ever done. With the drama behind me, I threw myself into work and finally got a promotion I'd been chasing for years. The little I've heard about Anna tells me she's still struggling. She's working part-time now and living with a friend after losing her apartment. I don't feel bad about it anymore. She made her bed. My parents? Still spreading their story to anyone who will listen, but fewer people are buying it these days. It's freeing not to care. I've also started reconnecting with people I'd lost touch with, friends, a few cousins, and even opened up to someone I'm dating now. They've been incredibly supportive, and for the first time, I feel like I'm surrounded by people who genuinely respect me. To anyone dealing with a toxic family, I know how hard it is, but it gets better. Cutting them off felt like ripping off a band-aid, but the peace that followed was worth every painful moment. You owe it to yourself to choose peace, to choose you. Thanks for reading.
I remember when I first met Ethan at the marketing firm in Seattle where we both worked. I was just 25, fresh into the industry, eager to prove myself, and he was a senior sales executive, already making waves. Our paths crossed often, and it wasn't long before what started as casual office chatter turned into something much more. We began dating about a year into knowing each other, and everything felt right. The chemistry was undeniable, and our shared interests only brought us closer. Ethan proposed to me during a special date at an art museum we both loved. It was a place that had always been a sanctuary for us, a place where we could escape the pressures of daily life and just be ourselves. The proposal was romantic, with Ethan getting down on one knee in front of a painting we both admired. I was over the moon. The thought of our future together filled me with joy and anticipation. But that joy began to dim as soon as Ethan's mother entered the picture. I had heard about her before, Ethan's stories of her strong opinions and high expectations, but I never imagined how challenging our relationship would become once she was involved. The first time I met her was at a dinner to celebrate our engagement. I remember her critical eyes scanning me, as if searching for flaws. She wasted no time in expressing her disapproval, making me feel like I had to constantly prove my worth. Despite the uneasy start, I was determined to move forward with our wedding plans. However, things quickly became more complicated. Ethan and his mother had some expectations about how my life should change after the wedding, namely, that I should quit my job. Initially, the idea of stepping back from my career seemed like a feasible compromise, especially since I had always dreamed of being a supportive partner. But as the days went by, my doubts grew. I loved my job. It was where I felt most confident and fulfilled. The thought of giving that up, especially with the increasing tension from Ethan's mother, felt like losing a part of myself. The situation worsened when Ethan's mother took over our wedding plans. What was meant to be a modest celebration quickly turned into a grand affair, driven by her extravagant ideas. The budget spiraled out of control as she insisted on lavish decorations, an elaborate menu, and a venue far beyond what Ethan and I had initially agreed upon. We had planned for a simple, elegant event, but her demands turned it into a spectacle. Ethan's family had initially promised to contribute to the wedding expenses. However, just as the planning was reaching its peak, they pulled out, leaving us with the entire financial burden. I tried to keep costs down by making practical decisions, but every choice was met with criticism from Ethan's mother. Her constant interference left me feeling isolated and powerless. It seemed like no matter what I did, I was never going to meet her expectations. The final blow came after our wedding. Ethan, without even discussing it with me, canceled the lease on the apartment we had planned to move into. Instead, he arranged for us to live with his parents. I was stunned. The apartment had been a symbol of our independence, a place where we could start our new life together. Now, it felt like I was being forced back into a situation where I had no control. I felt betrayed and overwhelmed. As if this wasn't enough, Ethan announced just days before our honeymoon that he would be going on the trip with his mother, not with me. I was heartbroken and angry. When I confronted him, he dismissed my feelings, saying it was important for his mother to have this time with him. Then, in a shocking act of cruelty, he destroyed my passport, making it impossible for me to join them. In that moment, everything came crashing down. I realized that I had married into a toxic and controlling environment, with Ethan completely under his mother's thumb. The betrayal felt like a cold, harsh slap in the face. I had hoped for a partnership based on love and mutual respect, but instead, I found myself in a nightmare of manipulation and control. Despite the emotional turmoil, a spark of resolve began to flicker within me. I had been documenting my interactions with Ethan's mother throughout the wedding planning process, initially just to keep a record. Now, those recordings became my lifeline. They were a tangible reminder of the toxicity I had been enduring and a crucial tool as I began to consider my next steps. The pain was still fresh, and the path ahead seemed daunting, but I knew I needed to make a change. I had to stand up for myself and reclaim my life, no matter how difficult that journey might be. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test my strength in ways I had never imagined. In the days that followed the wedding, the reality of living with Ethan's parents began to sink in. It was a constant reminder of how far my life had deviated from what I had hoped for. Their home, once a place I thought of as a temporary inconvenience, quickly became a prison. Every day, Ethan's mother's controlling nature seemed to tighten its grip on my life. Ethan's mother, Karen, was relentless. She continued to belittle my attempts to adjust to this new living arrangement, constantly finding fault with how I did things. From the way I cooked to the way I cleaned, nothing was ever good enough for her. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to avoid her scrutiny and criticism, but it was impossible to escape. Each day I spent in their house was a reminder of how isolated and powerless I felt. To make matters worse, Ethan seemed completely indifferent to my distress. He was absorbed in his work, often spending long hours at the office or engaged in social activities with his mother. It was as if he had completely disconnected from me and our marriage. Every time I tried to discuss my feelings or suggest we talk about our situation, he brushed me off or deflected the conversation. It was clear that he was more concerned about keeping the peace with his mother than addressing the problems in our marriage. Then came the crushing blow. Just days before our honeymoon, Ethan dropped a bombshell. He announced that he would be going on the trip with his mother instead of me. When I protested, demanding to know why, Ethan's response was cold and dismissive. He said it was important for his mother to have this time with him, and that I should understand. My heart sank. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. Our honeymoon was supposed to be our time to celebrate our new life together, not a getaway for Ethan and his mother. My anger and hurt reached a boiling point when Ethan went so far as to destroy my passport. I had been planning on joining them, hoping maybe I could salvage some of the trip, but when I found out my passport was gone, it was like a final blow to my sense of self. I was trapped in a situation I couldn't escape, with no way to even leave and find some solace. The emotional weight of it all began to take a serious toll on me. I was overwhelmed and felt utterly helpless. I knew I had to find a way out, but I didn't even know where to start. The idea of confronting Ethan and Karen seemed daunting and futile. They had already shown me how little they valued my feelings and opinions. Amidst the chaos, I found myself turning inward. I began to reflect on the decisions I had made and how I had gotten here. My once bright and hopeful outlook had been overshadowed by a toxic environment and a controlling mother-in-law. I felt like I had lost a part of myself in the process. One evening, as I was trying to make sense of everything, I stumbled upon the recordings I had kept during the wedding planning. Initially, I had just wanted to document the process for my own peace of mind, but now they were a record of the emotional abuse and manipulation I had endured. Listening to those recordings was both painful and illuminating. They highlighted the extent of Karen's interference and Ethan's lack of support. It was clear that I had been subjected to more than just an overbearing mother-in-law. I was living in a deeply toxic situation. Determined to regain some control over my life, I started making plans. I knew that confronting Ethan and Karen directly wouldn't be enough. I needed to have a strategy and gather evidence to support my case. The recordings were a start, but I needed more. I began to document everything, every interaction, every incident of manipulation or control. It was also during this time that I realized the importance of seeking support. I reached out to my family, though I had been hesitant before. I needed their support and understanding more than ever. My Uncle David, who was a high-ranking executive at the firm where I worked, became a crucial ally. He had always been a quiet source of support in my life, and now I needed him more than ever. With the evidence I had gathered and David's support, I felt a glimmer of hope. I started to see a way out of the toxic environment I was trapped in. The journey ahead was daunting, but I was determined to stand up for myself and reclaim my life. It was clear that Ethan and his mother had underestimated my resolve. As I prepared to take decisive action, I knew that I would face resistance. But for the first time since all of this began, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was ready to confront the betrayal and fight for my future. The path was still unclear, but I was determined to navigate it with strength and resolve. The days following Ethan's announcement about the honeymoon were a blur of anger and despair. I was trapped in a house that felt more like a cage every day, with Ethan and Karen continuing their toxic control over every aspect of my life. I knew I had to take action, but the enormity of the situation felt overwhelming. Every time I tried to approach Ethan, he was either dismissive or evasive. I could sense his increasing detachment and his complete alignment with his mother's wishes. Despite feeling emotionally drained, I used my anger as fuel. I reviewed the recordings and notes I had collected, each one a reminder of the manipulation and control I had endured. I started organizing the evidence systematically, hoping to build a strong case for myself. My Uncle David's support became even more crucial. I needed his expertise and his position at the firm to navigate the next steps. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of sifting through my recordings, I met with David at his office. The seriousness in his eyes as he listened to my story gave me a renewed sense of purpose. He was shocked by the extent of Ethan and Karen's manipulation, and his support gave me the courage to press forward. "Laura," David said with determination, "you're not alone in this. We're going to make sure this gets handled properly. Let's start by reviewing the evidence you've collected. We need to build a solid case." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. We spent hours going through the recordings and organizing them into a coherent timeline of events. David's calm demeanor and logical approach helped me see a way forward amidst the chaos. It was clear that Ethan's actions, combined with his mother's interference, created a toxic environment that was not just emotionally abusive, but also involved financial misconduct. The next step was crucial: gathering more evidence of Ethan's embezzlement. I had suspected something was off when I stumbled upon financial discrepancies in some of the documents I had access to. With David's advice, I began to carefully collect and document these irregularities. It was a risky move, but I knew it was necessary. Weeks passed, and I started to notice Ethan and Karen's increasing frustration with my apparent detachment. They continued to try and manipulate me into resuming my duties as a wife, expecting me to fall back into the submissive role they had envisioned for me. Their efforts only fueled my resolve. I wasn't going to let them undermine my self-worth any longer. Then came the pivotal moment. I finally gathered enough concrete evidence of Ethan's embezzlement and his mother's complicity. I had meticulously documented financial records, emails, and other relevant materials that painted a clear picture of the corruption. With David's help, I presented this evidence to the authorities and the company's internal investigation team. It was an intense and nerve-wracking process, but the gravity of the situation propelled me forward. As the investigation unfolded, the pressure on Ethan and Karen intensified. Ethan was called in for questioning, and his previously confident demeanor started to crack. The walls of their deceit were closing in, and the once seemingly impenetrable facade of their control began to crumble. Meanwhile, Ethan and Karen returned from their ill-fated honeymoon, their faces a mix of confusion and anger as they realized the extent of their predicament. They were completely unaware of the storm that was brewing back home. When they tried to pressure me into resuming the marriage, expecting me to bow to their demands, they were met with an unwavering resistance. "Laura, you can't do this," Ethan pleaded one evening as he tried to convince me to put everything behind us. "We need to work things out." "No, Ethan," I responded firmly, my voice steady. "I've seen who you really are. I've seen what you and your mother have done. I'm not going to be manipulated anymore." Their attempts to regain control only highlighted their desperation. I knew that the battle was far from over, but I felt empowered and resolute. I had taken significant steps towards reclaiming my life and ensuring that Ethan and Karen faced the consequences of their actions. In the midst of this turmoil, I found solace in the support of my friends and family, especially David. Their belief in me and their encouragement helped me stay strong. I was no longer the person who had been swallowed by uncertainty and fear. I was reclaiming my power and taking charge of my future. As I prepared for the next phase of this journey, dealing with the fallout of the investigation and moving forward with the divorce, I felt a mixture of apprehension and determination. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to overcome it. The path ahead was still fraught with challenges, but I was no longer alone, and I was no longer powerless. The aftermath of the investigation was a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turbulence. With Ethan's embezzlement exposed and his fraudulent activities making headlines, the firm moved swiftly to distance itself from the scandal. Ethan was dismissed, and legal proceedings were initiated against him and his mother. I was both relieved and anxious. Relief came from knowing that justice was being served, but anxiety lingered as I faced the fallout of my actions. Ethan and Karen's attempts to manipulate me had reached new heights upon their return. They seemed to be in denial about the severity of the situation. Ethan tried to reach out, claiming he wanted to make amends. His remorse seemed shallow and self-serving, aimed more at reducing his legal consequences than genuinely acknowledging the pain he had caused. One evening, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. "Laura," he began, his voice strained, "I know you're angry, but you have to understand, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Ethan, the damage is done. Your actions have had consequences far beyond what you can imagine. I'm done trying to fix things that you broke." His face fell as he realized that his words had no power over me anymore. The legal system had already taken its course, and the weight of his actions was pressing down on him. Karen's position was no better. She was also facing legal scrutiny and had been publicly criticized for her involvement in Ethan's schemes. Despite their attempts to convince me otherwise, I remained resolute in moving forward with the divorce. I had long since made peace with the decision, knowing it was necessary for my well-being. The legal process was long and tedious, but every step was a reaffirmation of my strength and determination. With David's guidance, I navigated the complexities of the divorce proceedings, ensuring that I was protected both legally and financially. The divorce was finalized, and I felt a profound sense of liberation. The weight of the toxic relationship was lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally breathe freely. The months of emotional turmoil and legal battles had been draining, but they had also been transformative. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger. In the wake of these events, I began to rebuild my life. My work as a marketing manager, which had always been a source of stability, became even more fulfilling. I poured my energy into my career and personal development, rediscovering passions and interests that had been overshadowed by the chaos of my past. My friends and family, especially David, remained steadfast in their support, and their presence was a constant reminder that I was not alone. The journey of healing was ongoing, but I was determined to embrace it fully. I sought therapy to process the emotional trauma and to ensure that I was not carrying any residual pain into my new life. It was a vital step towards reclaiming my self-worth and building a future on my own terms. As I looked back on the tumultuous period, I realized that it had taught me invaluable lessons about empowerment and resilience. I had faced betrayal and manipulation, but had found the strength to stand up for myself and demand justice. I had discovered that true empowerment comes from within, and that, even in the darkest moments, there's a way to reclaim one's life and dignity. With the legal battles behind me and a renewed sense of self, I began to focus on the future. My career flourished, and I explored new opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. I surrounded myself with positive influences and continued to build a support network of friends and colleagues who uplifted and inspired me. Ethan and Karen faded into the background of my past, their influence diminished by my strength and resolve. I knew that I had taken back control of my life and was moving towards a future where I could thrive on my own terms. The pain of betrayal had been replaced by a sense of accomplishment and hope for what lay ahead. In the end, I emerged stronger, having navigated the storm of betrayal and manipulation. My story became one of triumph over adversity, a testament to the power of standing up for oneself in the face of overwhelming odds. The journey was not easy, but it was transformative, and as I looked toward the future, I did so with the confidence that I had the strength to face whatever came next.
This story is titled, My Parents Hid the Secret That My Sister Cheated on Me with My Husband, but at her baby shower, the gift I gave ignited an overwhelming wave of violence against them. Hey, I don't even know where to begin with this, so I'll just start at the beginning. My name's Alina, 30 female. I grew up in Chicago with my older sister Julia, 32 female, and my parents. And honestly, I've always felt like I was just the extra kid. Julia was the one everyone doted on. She was the pretty one, the smart one, the golden child. Me? I was just there, the responsible one, the one they could count on to figure it out or not make a fuss. That's their way of saying I didn't matter as much. It wasn't like they were evil or anything. They just made it really clear, in 100 little ways, that Julia came first. Like, in middle school, I worked my butt off to win the regional spelling bee. I was so excited when I came home with the trophy. I thought they'd be proud. But my dad barely looked up from the newspaper, and my mom said, "That's nice, sweetie, but did you hear Julia got asked to the spring dance? Isn't that so exciting?" High school was worse. I made the varsity swim team, which was a big deal because I was just a freshman. But Julia was a senior and got a lead in the school play. Guess which one they showed up for? It wasn't the swim meets. I remember sitting in the car after a big competition, holding my first place medal, and my dad asking if I could give Julia a ride to her play rehearsal. I wanted to throw the medal at him, but I just said sure. Even now, as adults, it hasn't stopped. A few years ago, when Julia bought her first house, my parents helped with the down payment. They even paid her closing costs. When I mentioned needing help with car repairs, my mom said, "Oh, sweetie, maybe you should budget better." Like, okay, I'll just budget better next time my transmission goes out. Cool. Anyway, the point is, Julia's always been the favorite. I never hated her for it, though. I figured that's just how families are sometimes, you know? I thought she cared about me, that we were close despite all the weird favoritism. But last week, I found out how wrong I was. It started when I went to my parents' house to drop off some paperwork my mom had asked for. Nothing dramatic, just insurance stuff she needed me to fill out because apparently, I'm the only one who knows how to handle paperwork. When I walked in, they were sitting in the living room. My mom was on the phone, and I could hear her on speaker. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard Julia's voice. She said, "Mom, Alina can't find out about me and Jay. Jay, my husband." I froze. My mom said something like, "Don't worry, sweetie, she won't. It's better this way. You've got so much on the line." My dad chimed in with, "Yeah, let's not ruin your life over one mistake." My heart felt like it stopped. My own sister, my husband, and my parents knew? I felt like I'd been sucker punched. I quietly backed out of the house and left. I didn't even grab the paperwork. I just got in my car and drove home, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just heard. When I got home, Jay was there, sitting on the couch like everything was fine. I couldn't even look at him. I went straight to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to barge into the living room and scream at him. Another part of me wanted to drive straight to Julia's house and confront her. But mostly, I just felt numb. For the next few days, I kept to myself. Jay kept asking me if something was wrong, but I couldn't talk to him. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt like I was going to cry or throw up. I couldn't even text Julia. I knew if I tried, I'd lose it completely. The thing is, this isn't just about the cheating. It's about the betrayal from all sides. My sister, who I thought I could trust. My parents, who I thought were supposed to love me. They all knew, and none of them cared enough to tell me. They cared more about protecting Julia's perfect image than protecting me. I spent a lot of time just sitting in my car, driving around aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to confront them without proof. What if they denied it? What if they made me feel like I was crazy? So, I decided to wait. I didn't know what I was waiting for exactly, but I knew I needed to keep my cool until I had a plan. Then, a few days later, my mom called me, all cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "Alina, honey, can you help plan Julia's baby shower?" she asked, like she wasn't actively covering for Julia sleeping with my husband. Oh yeah, did I mention Julia's pregnant? And now I don't even know if the baby's her husband Nate's or if it's Jay's. The audacity of her asking me to plan this party was almost laughable, but instead of blowing up at her, I said, "Sure, Mom, I'd love to help." After that call with my mom, I was done feeling sorry for myself. It wasn't just about Julia sleeping with Jay anymore. It was about all of them thinking they could get away with it. My parents, my sister, my husband, They were treating me like I was some kind of clueless idiot who'd just smile and go along with everything. That pissed me off more than anything. But I knew I couldn't just blow up and start yelling. No one would take me seriously, and they'd probably twist it around to make me look like the bad guy. Julia's always been good at playing the victim, and I wasn't going to give her that chance. If I wanted to confront them, I needed proof, not just vague suspicions or overheard conversations. I needed hard evidence they couldn't deny. So that night, after Jay fell asleep, I grabbed his phone. Normally, I'd feel weird about going through someone's stuff, but honestly, after what I'd overheard, I didn't feel guilty at all. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first, but it didn't take long to find something. Jay wasn't exactly a mastermind when it came to hiding things. He had a folder on his phone labeled Receipts. Real subtle, right? And when I opened it, there they were. Photos of him and Julia. Some were just selfies, but others were, well, let's just say there was no mistaking what was going on. One picture was of the two of them at a hotel. Julia was in a bathrobe, and Jay was grinning like a damn fool. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just stared at the pictures, saving them to my own phone one by one. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from pure anger. How could they be so careless? So confident that I'd never find out. After the photos, I went through his messages. There was a long thread between him and Julia, full of inside jokes, I miss you texts, and plans to meet up. One text stood out to me. Julia had sent him a picture of a baby onesie with the caption, "Do you think Nate will like this?" That hit me like a ton of bricks. They weren't just having an affair, they were laughing about it, mocking Nate, lying to him, and playing happy families while this whole mess unfolded. I saved the messages and moved on to his email. At first, I thought there wouldn't be anything there. Who emails about affairs, right? But then I found a confirmation email for a hotel booking from a few months ago. The name on the reservation was his, but there was a note about special arrangements for 2 guests. The date lined up perfectly with one of the texts Julia had sent him about getting away for a weekend. I took screenshots of everything, every picture, every message, every email. I even forwarded some of the emails to myself just in case Jay ever tried to delete them. I wasn't going to let them wiggle out of this. Over the next few nights, I kept digging. I went through Jay's laptop, his social media accounts, and even his old backups. At one point, I found a folder of old photos that he probably forgot even existed. There was one picture of him and Julia from a family barbecue a couple of years ago. They were standing a little too close, and Julia had her hand on his arm. Looking back now, it felt like a giant neon sign that I had been too blind to see. But it wasn't just about Jay. I started paying attention to Julia's social media too. She's one of those people who posts everything online. Brunches, shopping trips, yoga sessions, you name it. At first glance, it all seemed harmless. But when I looked closer, I noticed little things. A photo of her at a cafe with 2 cups of coffee on the table, but no one else in the frame. A picture of her at a hotel lobby with the caption, "Weekend Escape," but no tag for Nate or any of her friends. It all started to add up. They weren't even being careful. They thought I was too stupid to notice, too blind to connect the dots. That was their biggest mistake. By the end of the week, I had more evidence than I knew what to do with. Photos, messages, emails, social media posts. It was like a giant puzzle that painted a picture of their betrayal. But I wasn't done yet. I decided to check Julia's husband Nate's social media too. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I figured it couldn't hurt. Nate didn't post much, but his recent photos showed a man who looked tired, like something was eating away at him. In one post, he'd written, "Life's full of surprises. Not all of them good." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now I wondered if he knew something was up. I considered reaching out to Nate, but I wasn't sure if that was the right move. What if he didn't believe me? What if he was in on it somehow? The last thing I wanted was to give Julia a heads up before I had my plan fully in place. The final piece of the puzzle came when I stumbled onto a shared family folder my parents kept online. It was mostly full of old photos and documents, but there was one folder marked baby shower plans. I opened it out of curiosity, and there it was. A draft guest list for Julia's shower. My name was listed as the event coordinator. I almost laughed. They wanted me to coordinate the shower for the woman who was sleeping with my husband? The sheer audacity of it was unreal. But that's when it hit me. The shower wasn't just a party, it was the perfect stage. Everyone would be there. Julia, Jay, my parents, Nate, their friends and family. I closed the folder and sat back, my mind racing. The baby shower wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a reckoning. Everything then started falling into place. I mean, how could I resist? My mom was practically handing me the opportunity on a silver platter, acting like nothing was wrong. The plan wasn't just about exposing Julia and Jay, it was about making everyone see what they'd done, the lies, the betrayal, the absolute sham of their perfect lives. And I wasn't going to hold back. The first step was making sure everything looked normal. I agreed to take charge of the shower, like the good little sister they all expected me to be. My mom was thrilled, texting me nonstop with ideas for decorations, themes, and catering. She even sent me links to Pinterest boards, which honestly was hilarious considering the chaos I was about to unleash. I acted like the perfect team player, messaging Julia and asking her what colors she wanted for the decorations. She replied with pink and gold, for something classy, like she had a clue what class even meant. I didn't let on for a second that I knew about her and Jay. I kept my replies short and sweet, pretending I was too busy to chat much. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. Once the basics were handled, I started working on the real plan. I had all the evidence saved on my phone, but I needed a way to present it that would leave no room for doubt. At first, I thought about just printing everything out and handing it to people, but that felt too small. I wanted this to be big, undeniable, and impossible for them to ignore. That's when I remembered the projector at the event venue. The shower was being held at this fancy community hall my parents had rented. It came with all the bells and whistles, including a giant screen and a projector system. Perfect. I spent hours putting together a PowerPoint presentation. It was the most effort I'd ever put into something for Julia, and it wasn't even for her benefit. The first few slides were harmless, generic congratulatory messages, and cute baby-themed graphics. But then it shifted. The next slides featured screenshots of Julia and Jay's texts, complete with timestamps. Then came the photos. I chose the most damning ones. I ended the presentation with a short video clip of them in a hotel room. It wasn't explicit or anything, but it didn't need to be. Julia's giggling, "Nate will never find out," was enough. When the presentation was done, I saved it to a USB drive and triple-checked it to make sure it worked. I also backed it up on my phone and emailed it to myself just in case. I wasn't taking any chances. With the evidence ready, I turned my attention back to the party. I needed to make sure everything looked perfect, so no one suspected a thing. I ordered fancy decorations, set up a catering menu, and even designed personalized party favors with Julia's name on them. My mom kept gushing about how proud she was of me for coming together for my sister. Every time she said something like that, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The week leading up to the shower was surreal. Jay was acting like nothing was wrong, probably assuming I hadn't noticed anything. Julia was her usual bubbly self, texting me every day with questions about the party. My parents were full of their usual over-the-top excitement, constantly talking about how wonderful it was that Julia was going to be a mom. I played along, smiling and nodding, even though every word they said felt like a slap in the face. But I didn't let it show. If they thought I was oblivious, all the better. The morning of the shower, I arrived at the venue early to set up. Guests started arriving, including Julia and Nate. She looked radiant, like someone who thought she had the world wrapped around her finger. Nate looked tired, but he was trying to keep up appearances. Then there was Jay. He showed up late, of course, and gave me this sheepish smile like he was expecting me to be mad about him not helping. I just waved him off, pretending like I didn't care. If he only knew. My cousin Clara showed up with her phone out, already live streaming for her Instagram followers. She's one of those people who documents everything, and normally it's annoying, but today, it was a blessing. Clara's live stream meant the entire world would see what was about to happen, not just the people in the room. As the party got underway, I made sure everything was running smoothly. People were laughing, eating, and complimenting Julia on how great she looked. My parents were buzzing around, practically glowing with pride. When it was time for speeches, my mom went first, saying how proud she was of Julia and how excited she was to be a grandmother. Julia teared up, of course, because she loves being the center of attention. Then it was my turn. I grabbed the microphone, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Julia," I said, "you've always been the star of the family. Today, I wanted to give you something truly unforgettable." I walked over to the projector, plugged in the USB drive, and hit play. At first, everything seemed fine. The first slide was a picture of Julia and Nate from one of their trips. Something sweet and harmless to set the mood. People were smiling, nodding, and a few even clapped, thinking it was going to be one of those cheesy, sentimental presentations. Julia looked at me like I was the best sister ever, giving me that fake, grateful smile she's mastered over the years. And then, slide 2 hit. The room went quiet, and I mean dead silent. The slide showed a screenshot of one of Julia and Jay's text conversations. It wasn't anything too explicit, just flirty messages about missing each other and can't wait to see you again. But it was enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Julia's smile froze, and she glanced at me, confused. Jay, on the other hand, Looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't pause. I let the next slide roll. A series of photos of Julia and Jay at a hotel. One was just the two of them standing in the lobby, but the next one showed Julia in a bathrobe sitting on the edge of a bed, smiling at Jay, who was standing behind her with his shirt off. That's when the whispers started. "What is this?" Someone near the front muttered. "Is that Jay? That's not Nate, right?" Julia's face went from confused to panicked. She stood up, half reaching for the projector, but it was too late. The next slide hit, a short text exchange where Julia joked about how clueless Nate was, and how easy it was to keep the secret. "Alina!" Julia's voice cut through the murmurs. "What the hell is this?" I ignored her. I didn't even look at her. The presentation rolled on. The next slide was another level shock. It was the video. Just a short clip of Julia and Jay sitting on a hotel bed. That's when the room exploded. Nate shot up from his chair, his face a mix of shock and anger. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Julia froze. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Jay, sitting a few seats away, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. "Is this real?" someone in the back asked. "What the hell is going on?" Clara's live stream was still rolling, capturing every second of the chaos. Her phone was blowing up with comments like, "OMG, this is wild!" and "Someone stop the presentation!" People at the party started pulling out their phones, filming and texting others. Julia finally found her voice. "Alina, stop this! What's wrong with you?" she yelled, her face red and her voice cracking. I stood there, calm as ever. I grabbed the microphone and said, "What's wrong with me?" "Julia, maybe you should be asking yourself that question. Sleeping with my husband? Really? And you thought I wouldn't find out?" Gasps rippled through the room. "Wait," Nate said, holding up his hand. "What did you just say? You slept with Jay?" He was looking at Julia now, his expression shifting from confused to furious. "It's not what it looks like," Julia stammered, tears streaming down her face. "I can explain." "Explain what?" Nate snapped. "That you've been screwing her husband? That's a hell of an explanation, Julia." Jay tried to stand up, raising his hands as if to calm everyone down. Let's just talk about this," he said, his voice shaking. I couldn't help but laugh at that. "Oh, now you want to talk? You didn't seem too interested in talking when you were sneaking around behind my back." Julia turned to me, her voice desperate. "Alina, please, we're family. You didn't have to do this in front of everyone." "Family?" I said, glaring at her. "You're seriously talking about family right now? Where was that family loyalty when you were hooking up with my husband? Don't even try to guilt me, Julia. You made your bed. Now lie in it." My parents, who had been eerily quiet until now, finally decided to jump in. My mom stood up, looking at me with this horrified expression. "Alina, enough! You've made your point. This isn't the place for this." "Oh, it's exactly the place for this," I shot back. "You've been covering for her this whole time, haven't you? Don't think I don't know. You knew about Julia and Jay, and instead of telling me, you helped her keep it a secret. Some mother you are." My dad tried to step in, but Nate cut him off. "You knew," he said, pointing at my parents. "You knew Julia was cheating on me, and you didn't say anything?" "It's not like that," my mom said, looking flustered. "We were trying to protect..." "Protect who?" I interrupted. "Julia, because it sure as hell wasn't me." The room was chaos now. Guests were whispering, phones were buzzing, and my parents were trying to calm Nate down, while Julia just stood there crying. Jay, meanwhile, had quietly slipped toward the back of the room, clearly trying to escape. "Where do you think you're going?" I called out to him. Everyone turned to look as Jay froze, halfway to the door. "Alina, he started, but I didn't let him finish. "You don't get to walk away from this," I said. "You don't get to pretend like you didn't blow up our marriage. You and Julia deserve each other. I'm done with both of you." With that, I handed the microphone to one of the stunned party organizers and walked out. I didn't look back, but I could hear the chaos continuing behind me. As I got to my car, Clara caught up with me, her phone still in her hand. "Holy crap, Alina," she said out of breath. I don't even know what to say. People online are freaking out. The live stream is going viral." "Good," I said, slamming my car door shut. "Let the whole world know what they did." And with that, I drove away, leaving the mess behind me. I spent the next few days ignoring my phone. My mom and dad kept calling, but I didn't bother answering. Jay tried texting me, too. Pathetic stuff like, "Can we talk?" and "You're being unreasonable." Yeah, I'm the unreasonable one. Sure, buddy. I didn't even bother blocking him because, honestly, his desperation made me laugh. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Mia, one of Julia's closest friends. Mia and I were never super close, but we'd hung out a few times at family events because Julia insisted on dragging her everywhere. She sent me a text that said, "Hey, can we talk? It's about Julia. I saw what happened at the shower." At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to deal with more drama, but eventually I texted back, "What's up?" Within minutes, she called me, and her voice was shaky. "I don't even know how to say this," Mia started. "But after the shower, I can't stop thinking about some stuff. I think Julia might have been messing around with my husband, Dan." Now, I didn't know Dan very well. He was one of those guys who always looked a little too slick, always dressed a little too perfectly, and always had a smirk that made me side-eye him. But the idea of Julia hooking up with her best friend's husband? At this point, it didn't even surprise me. "What makes you think that?" I asked, trying to sound calm even though I was already convinced Julia was guilty. Mia hesitated. "There have been a lot of little things, like Dan started acting weird around Julia a few months ago. He'd get really defensive if I asked about her, and one time I caught him smiling at his phone while texting her. When I asked who it was, he said it was work stuff. But then I saw the contact name and it just said Jay. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after seeing your presentation at the shower," her voice trailed off. "Mia, you need to check his phone," I said firmly. "If Julia was hooking up with Jay, there's no way she wouldn't go after someone else's husband too. She's trash. I hate to say it, but you probably already know the truth." Mia sighed. "Okay, I'll do it tonight." The next morning, I woke up to about 20 missed calls and texts from Mia. The first one just said, "Call me ASAP." Another said, "I can't believe this." And one simply read, "It's true." I called her back, and as soon as she answered, she burst into tears. "I found everything," she sobbed. "Texts, photos, emails, everything. Julia and Dan have been sleeping together for months. And it gets worse, Alina. He might be the father of her baby." I didn't even know what to say at first. It was so on brand for Julia that I wasn't shocked, but hearing it confirmed still made me furious. "Mia, I'm so sorry," I said finally. "What are you going to do?" "I kicked him out last night," she said through tears. "I couldn't even look at him. He tried to deny it at first, but when I showed him the texts, he just shut up. I told him I wanted a divorce, and he didn't even fight me on it." "Good for you," I said. "You deserve better than that scumbag. And Julia? She's disgusting. I don't even have words for how low she is." Mia sniffled. I can't believe she'd do this to me. I thought she was my friend." "Yeah, I thought she was my sister," I replied bitterly. "Turns out she's just a selfish, cheating mess who doesn't care who she hurts." Mia told me more about what she found. One text stood out. Julia sent Dan a picture of a baby onesie and wrote, "Can't wait to see if it looks like you or Nate." The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. She wasn't just cheating, she was flaunting it. After Mia dropped the biggest news about Julia's baby potentially being Dan's, it felt like the universe was working overtime to unravel Julia's entire life. And honestly, I wasn't mad about it. For years, she walked around acting like she was untouchable, like nothing she did had consequences. Well, now the consequences were coming, and they weren't pulling any punches. The fallout started with Nate. He didn't waste any time after the baby shower. He kicked her out that same night. Julia tried calling him, probably to spin her usual web of excuses and lies, but Nate wasn't having it. He blocked her number, filed for divorce, and even announced it on social media with a simple post. Starting fresh. Short, but brutal. And the best part? Nate's friends and family rallied behind him. Julia had always been good at charming people, but this time, she'd gone too far. The evidence from the baby shower was too damning, and everyone had seen it. Clips of the presentation were circulating online. Strangers were tearing Julia apart in the comments, calling her everything from a homewrecker to a psychopath. Jay, on the other hand, was trying to keep a low profile. After I kicked him out, he went straight to my parents' house, where Julia was also staying. The irony wasn't lost on me. My cheating husband and my cheating sister, holed up together like two rats in a sinking ship. My parents, of course, welcomed them with open arms because, God forbid, Julia ever faces the consequences of her actions. But even Jay couldn't stick it out for long. A week later, I heard through a mutual friend that he and Julia were fighting. Apparently, Jay had found out about Dan. I don't know how exactly. Maybe Mia's divorce paperwork mentioned it, or maybe Julia let it slip during one of her crocodile tear breakdowns. Either way, Jay wasn't happy. According to the friend, Jay confronted Julia about Dan, and she tried to brush it off, saying it was just a fling and didn't mean anything. Jay, being the hypocrite that he is, got all self-righteous about being cheated on. He packed his bags and left, leaving Julia crying on my parents' couch. When I heard about this, I laughed for a good 5 minutes. The audacity of Jay, a man who cheated on me for months, being mad that Julia cheated on him? It was almost too good to be true. The best part was that Julia had nowhere else to go. Nate didn't want her. Jay was done with her. And even Dan hadn't reached out to Julia since Mia served him with divorce papers. And according to Mia, he was barely even acknowledging the baby. Mia told me Julia had tried calling Dan multiple times, leaving desperate voicemails about how they needed to talk about their future. But he wasn't biting. I couldn't help but laugh. Julia had spent her whole life acting like everyone wanted to orbit around her. But now, she was completely alone. My parents tried to keep up appearances, pretending everything was fine. But even they couldn't ignore the mess. People in their social circle started talking, and the whispers weren't flattering. My mom called me one afternoon, probably hoping to smooth things over and convince me to come back into the fold. "Alina, sweetie," she started, using her best guilt trip voice. "I know things have been difficult lately, but we're still a family. We need to work through this together." I almost choked on my coffee. "You mean the same family that covered for Julia while she destroyed my marriage?" "Yeah, no thanks." "Alina, that's not fair," she said, her voice tightening. "We were just trying to keep the peace." "Peace?" I snapped. "That's not peace. That's enabling. And now you want me to just forget about it?" "Not happening." She tried a few more lines, but I wasn't budging. By the end of the call, it was clear that she and my dad were more concerned about saving face than actually fixing anything. I told her as much before hanging up. Julia, on the other hand, was spiraling. I didn't hear this directly. She wouldn't dare talk to me, but mutual friends started reaching out to spill the tea. Apparently, Julia wasn't handling the public backlash well. She tried deleting her social media accounts, but by then, screenshots of her and Jay's texts had been plastered everywhere. Strangers were tagging her in posts, dragging her name through the mud. Even her so-called friends were distancing themselves. One of her closest friends, Natalie, told me she hadn't spoken to Julia since the baby shower. "I can't believe she would do that to you," Natalie said. "And to Mia. Like, what kind of person does that?" I didn't have an answer. Julia wasn't just selfish. She was reckless. She never thought about how her actions would affect other people. And now, for the first time, she was paying the price. The cherry on top came when Julia gave birth a few weeks later. I didn't go to the hospital, obviously, but I heard through the grapevine that Nate insisted on a paternity test before signing anything. And it's easy to guess. The baby wasn't Nate's. It was Dan's. When Mia told me, I nearly fell off my chair. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Nope," Mia replied. "Nate called me himself. He said the test was clear as day. It's Dan's kid. He told Julia he's done with her for good." I could only imagine the look on Julia's face when she got the results. She'd already lost Nate, Jay, and Dan. Now she was stuck raising a baby on her own, with no one left to blame but herself. As for me, I was finally feeling free. My divorce from Jay was finalized a few weeks after the baby shower. It was, in a word, liberating. It wasn't easy, divorces never are, but compared to the emotional weight of the betrayal, the legal part was surprisingly straightforward. Jay didn't even try to fight me on it, which was probably the smartest thing he'd done in years. Maybe he felt guilty, or maybe he just wanted to move on as quickly as possible. Either way, I wasn't about to complain. I'd contacted a lawyer the morning after the baby shower. I didn't want to waste time wallowing or letting Jay think there was any chance of reconciliation. The lawyer was amazing, straight to the point, empathetic, and clearly someone who had seen plenty of cases like mine. "You're doing the right thing," she said, after I finished explaining the situation. "People like Jay don't change, and you deserve better." We went through all the necessary steps, and thankfully, there wasn't much to fight over. Jay and I didn't have kids, which made things simpler, and we'd only bought the house together a few years ago. It wasn't fully paid off, so we agreed to sell it and split the proceeds. He tried to bring up some small stuff, like the furniture or the TV, but I didn't care. He could take whatever he wanted as long as he was out of my life. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was the emotional toll. Signing those papers felt like both an ending and a beginning. On one hand, it was heartbreaking to see my marriage, something I thought would last forever, reduced to a pile of documents and signatures. On the other hand, it was the final step in reclaiming my life. For too long, I'd let Jay's lies and Julia's manipulation define my reality. This was my chance to start over. The day the divorce was finalized, I threw out everything that reminded me of Jay. Old photos, his clothes, even the stupid mug he always used for coffee. It all went in the trash. It wasn't about being petty. Okay, maybe a little. It was about cleansing my space of the negativity he brought into my life. I didn't want any reminders of the man who betrayed me, the man who chose my sister over me. What surprised me the most was how quickly I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of Jay's lies on my shoulders. My apartment was small and modest, but it was mine, and it felt more like home than the house I'd shared with him ever did. Jay tried reaching out a couple of times after the divorce was finalized. His texts were pathetic, full of half-hearted apologies and vague promises about being a better person. I ignored every single one. He had his chance to be a better person, and he blew it. There was no going back. My parents kept trying to reach out, but I ignored their calls. I didn't need their half-baked apologies or their excuses. Julia could be their problem now. In the end, everything Julia had built, the fake perfect life, the lies, the manipulation, came crashing down. And honestly, it was satisfying to watch. This story is titled, Stepsister Falsely Accused Me of SA so she and her bro could take my dad's inheritance, but karma hit hard. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey everyone, I'm Ethan. It's my first time posting here. I told my friend what happened to me with my family. He suggested posting it on Reddit to hear your opinions. Alright, let me set the scene. My 33 male dad married Sam and Katie's mom, Linda. She was 39 back then, and I was 12. Linda had been widowed for a few years, and she came into the marriage with 2 kids of her own. Sam, who's 5 years older than me, and Katie, just a year younger than me. It wasn't exactly the Brady Bunch. Sam and Katie didn't hide the fact that they resented me. I guess I was an easy target. My mom had passed away a couple of years before, and I was still grieving when Linda and her kids moved in. Sam was always the alpha, taking every opportunity to boss me around or make me feel like I didn't belong. Katie was quieter, but her jabs were just as sharp. You're not really family, she once said when Dad wasn't around. Stuff like that stung, but I tried to brush it off. Over the years, we kind of settled into this Cold War dynamic. We tolerated each other for Dad's sake, but it was clear we were more rivals than siblings. When Linda passed away a few years ago, she was 54. I thought maybe things would change. I mean, we were all adults now, right? Wrong. If anything, the tension got worse. Fast forward to the present. Dad's getting older, and he's been open about wanting to finalize his will. He's always been upfront about his plans, splitting things fairly between the 3 of us. His logic was simple. We're all his kids now, and he wanted to treat us equally. I thought that was fair. Sam and Katie? Not so much. Sam's always had this entitlement thing going on. He's the oldest, so he acts like he should be Dad's right-hand man. Katie, meanwhile, plays the innocent, supportive daughter when Dad's around. But behind his back, she's just as calculating as Sam. I knew they weren't thrilled about the will, but I didn't realize how far they'd go to tip the scales in their favor. Which brings us to that fateful family dinner. It was supposed to be a nice evening. Just the 4 of us, catching up and enjoying Dad's famous lasagna. We'd barely gotten through the first round of small talk when Katie suddenly pipes up. I've been holding something in for years, she says, her voice shaky. The room goes silent. Dad looks up from his plate, frowning. What do you mean, Katie? She takes a deep breath, her eyes darting between Dad and Sam. I didn't want to bring this up, but I can't stay silent anymore. When we were kids, he hurt me. I blinked, my fork froze in midair. Was she talking about me? Dad's face turned pale. Who hurt you? Katie looked down, her hands trembling as she toyed with her napkin. Him, she whispered, barely glancing in my direction. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart started racing. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Katie flinched like I'd just yelled at her. Sam, ever the protective older brother, jumped in immediately. Don't you dare talk to her like that, he shouted, his eyes blazing. Dad held up a hand to silence me, his expression unreadable. Katie, he said softly, are you saying he did something to you? She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't think I'd ever have to say it out loud. I thought I could just move on. But now that we're talking about the will, I realized I can't let him benefit after he molested me. And just like that, the room tilted on its axis. This is insane, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You're making this up. Katie burst into full-on sobs, and Sam put an arm around her shoulders. You see how defensive he's getting, Dad? That's guilt. That's what guilt looks like. No, this is what being falsely accused looks like. I shot back. This is ridiculous. Katie, you know that never happened. Dad looked torn, his eyes flicking between me and Katie. Sam, he said finally. What do you think? Sam sighed, playing the concerned older brother to perfection. I believe Katie. Why would she lie about something like this? It's not like she gains anything by speaking up. Oh, but she did. They both did. This wasn't about justice or closure. This was about something else. I thought it might be about the will. Katie and Sam had always resented me, and now they had the perfect excuse to cut me out completely. But I wasn't sure what's their motive, and where the hell did the molesting shit came from. Dad, you can't seriously be considering this, I said, desperate to get through to him. I don't know what to think, he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. This is a lot to process. Katie sniffled, wiping her tears with her napkin. I didn't want to ruin dinner. I needed to say it. Sam nodded solemnly. We understand, Katie. You're so brave for speaking up. Brave? Are you kidding me? I looked around the table, feeling like I was in the Twilight Zone. This wasn't just an accusation. It was a calculated move, and I was their target. After Katie's meltdown at dinner, the whole family dynamic went straight into freefall. I'd wake up every morning feeling like I was walking into a courtroom where the jury was still deliberating, and the stakes were my entire future. The worst part? The prosecution was Katie and Sam, tag-teaming their way to Dad's heart and wallet. The next surprise came on a random Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from a long day, hoping to grab some leftovers and crash, when I noticed an envelope on the kitchen counter. It stood out immediately, too formal-looking for the usual bills or junk mail, and my name was written on it in Sam's annoyingly precise handwriting. I should have left it alone. Something about it screamed trouble. I tore it open, expecting another passive-aggressive note or some twisted ultimatum. What I found instead is a formal notice of intent to sue. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching words like emotional distress and intentional harm. It wasn't just vague, it was designed to ruin me without actually saying much. And then I saw the worst, the demand for damages. They wanted money, of course, but this wasn't just about cash. It was about dragging my name through the mud and making me look like a monster. I sat down at the table, the paper shaking in my hands. A million thoughts raced through my mind, most of them variations of, "Are you kidding me?" It was bad enough they'd turned Dad into their personal puppet, but now they were trying to destroy me completely. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was open war. Later that evening, I shoved the letter at Dad, desperate for him to see through their nonsense. This, I said, pointing to the pages, is what your precious Katie and Sam are up to now. He picked up the letter, squinting at the legal jargon, his face drawn and tired. When he finally set it down, his response made my stomach drop. This is a family matter, he said quietly, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. We shouldn't let it get this far. They're the ones taking it this far, Dad. My voice cracked as I slammed my hand on the table. And you're just standing there, letting them destroy me. He rubbed his temples, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I'll talk to them. But he wouldn't. He never did. I could already see how it would play out. Katie would cry. Sam would talk circles around him. And Dad would do what he always did. Nothing. I was on my own, and I knew it. The worst part wasn't the lawsuit itself, though that was bad enough. It was knowing that even if I somehow managed to win, I'd still lose in the court of public opinion. At least the opinion of my family. Katie and Sam had already painted me as the villain, and this was just their final brushstroke. But if they thought this would break me, they were wrong. They might have fired the first shot, but they'd just given me a reason to fight back. The next morning, I was in a lawyer's office, a dingy little place downtown that smelled like old paper and desperation. My lawyer, Angela, was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of person I needed. She flipped through the notice with a calm expression, her pen tapping against the edge of her desk. Well, this is creative, she said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. They've thrown everything but the kitchen sink into this claim. Emotional distress, reputational damage. Honestly, it's almost impressive how vague they've managed to keep it. I slumped in my chair, my frustration bubbling over. Impressive? They're accusing me of things I didn't do, Angela. They've already turned my dad against me. Now they're trying to ruin me completely. Angela set the papers down and leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. Let me be clear about something. They're banking on intimidation. This is a scare tactic, plain and simple. They're hoping you'll panic, settle, or back off entirely. But their case? It's weak. Paper thin, actually. Her confidence was a small but much-needed lifeline. So, what do? She gave a small shrug. First, we respond formally. I'll file a motion to dismiss the frivolous parts, which is basically everything. Then we'll gather evidence, poke holes in their story, and let the court see what this really is. A pathetic attempt to bully you into submission. I wanted to believe her, but doubt still gnawed at me. What about the rest of the family? They're already against me. If this goes public, Angela raised a hand, cutting me off. Let me worry about the legal side of things. Your job is to stay out of trouble and not give them any ammo. The court deals with facts, not family gossip, And trust me, the facts are on your side. Her words were strong, jolting me back to reality. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a fighting chance. Angela was a professional, and while Katie and Sam might have mastered the art of manipulation, they didn't have the law on their side. As I left her office that day, a new thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, I could come out of this mess not just intact, but stronger. Katie and Sam might have started this fight, but they'd just made a critical mistake. They underestimated me. I may not know what lies ahead, but I'm feeling optimistic about the lawsuit. I'll keep you guys updated. Update 1 point. Hey guys, it's Ethan. Guess what? The fight turned real when the lawsuit moved forward. Angela worked fast, filing a motion to dismiss the more ridiculous claims in the suit. They've got nothing to stand on, she said, her tone crisp. But we need to be strategic. They're using this as a platform to keep their story alive, and that's where they're dangerous. The depositions were brutal. Katie cried through hers, giving vague statements about how my actions had ruined her ability to trust and caused her unimaginable stress. Angela was unshaken. She leaned forward, her tone cutting but calm. Can you provide specific instances of these alleged actions? Katie stammered, her narrative falling apart under scrutiny. She managed to string together a few exaggerated stories, but nothing held up when Angela pressed her for dates or evidence. Sam, of course, tried to play it cool. He spoke in measured tones, giving long-winded explanations that boiled down to nothing concrete. At one point, he said, "This isn't about facts. It's about the impact of his behavior." Angela raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp. "Impact requires evidence. What specific behavior are you referring to?" Sam faltered, and the cracks in their story became impossible to ignore. Equarked. Still, even with the lawsuit thing, Katie's accusations started to spread. Sam and Katie didn't just rely on Dad's doubt to do the damage. They worked overtime to make sure everyone in the family heard their version of events. It wasn't direct or confrontational. They were too smart for that. They used insinuation, whispers, and well-timed emotional breakdowns to weave their narrative into every corner of my life. At first, I thought the fallout would stay within our immediate family. But then, at a family friend's wedding, I started noticing the looks. You know the kind. The kind people give when they've heard something they shouldn't have, but can't quite reconcile it with what they know about you. It started small. Aunt Karen, who'd always been a little nosy but warm, suddenly seemed colder. She avoided making eye contact, and when I tried to engage her in conversation, she gave curt, dismissive answers. I didn't think much of it until I overheard her talking to Katie near the dessert table. "I just can't believe he'd still show up to things like this," Karen whispered, glancing in my direction. Katie sighed deeply, playing the victim role perfectly. "It's just something I have to deal with," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough pain to pull sympathy. I try to stay strong for Dad, but it's hard being around him. Sam, of course, was no less subtle. His weapon wasn't fake tears. It was carefully curated conversations that always left people questioning me. At work, things weren't much better. Word travels fast in families, and it's amazing how little it takes for whispers to seep into other parts of your life. A co-worker I'd been friendly with for years suddenly started canceling our lunch plans, and I caught another one glancing at me warily during a meeting. It wasn't just the looks, though. My world started to shrink. Invitations to family dinners stopped coming. Friends who'd been constant suddenly seemed busy every time I reached out. Even strangers seemed to sense the tension, like it was radiating off me. The worst part? I couldn't do anything about it. How do you defend yourself against something as vague and insidious as an accusation that's never fully stated? Sam and Katie had orchestrated this perfectly, staying just on the edge of outright defamation, but doing enough damage to make me question my place in the world. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend from high school at a coffee shop. Mike had always been straightforward. No nonsense, no beating around the bush. He greeted me with a warm smile, but as we talked, his tone shifted. "So," he said carefully, "everything okay with your family?" I paused, my coffee halfway to my mouth. "Why do you ask?" He scratched the back of his head. "Just, I heard something. From your cousin's sister-in-law, I think? I don't know, man. It sounded heavy. Even here, in this random interaction, the shadow of Sam and Katie's whispers was following me. What did you hear?" I asked, my voice low. Mike hesitated, then shrugged. "Something about you and Katie not getting along? Look, I don't want to spread gossip. I figured if it was important, you'd tell me." "It's not true," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Whatever you've heard, it's not true." Mike nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. And that killed me. I was losing ground, and fast. Sam's influence wasn't just about turning Dad against me anymore. It was about isolating me completely. Every interaction felt like a test, every glance like a judgment. And the worst part was, I knew Sam and Katie were just getting started. They weren't satisfied with planting doubt in Dad's mind. They wanted everyone, family, friends, co-workers, to see me as the villain in their story. And if I didn't find a way to fight back, they'd succeed. I realized that if I stayed passive, their version of the story would be the only one people ever heard. And I wasn't about to let them take everything from me without a fight. After months of back and forth, the judge finally dismissed most of their claims as unsubstantiated and without merit. Katie and Sam's case was reduced to a single minor claim, which Angela settled out of court for a symbolic dollar amount. "It's a win," she said with a triumphant grin. "They didn't want a trial because they knew they'd lose everything. So this is where I am right now. I actually still feel miserable and do not think they will let me on my own. If anything happens, I'll post an update here. Update 2: Hey, it's Ethan. Hear what happened." So Sam's manipulations did not stop. He started taking active moves to take control of Dad's legacy. It became clear during a family dinner, one of the few times everyone was under the same roof. As usual, Katie sat at the edge of the table, silent but visibly distressed. Dad looked distracted, and Sam took full advantage. As plates were being cleared, Sam leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad's been going through some estate planning," he said, glancing at Katie. "It's been hard, but we're making progress." The room went quiet. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking anywhere but at me. "It's nothing major," he said quickly. "Just making sure things are in order." Sam gave a patronizing nod. "Right. Nothing major. Just a few adjustments to make sure everyone is protected." "Protected from what?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Sam turned to me with an expression of mock concern. "It's not about you," he said smoothly. "It's about Katie. She's been through enough, don't you think?" The unspoken accusation hung in the air. My fists clenched under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Katie doesn't need protection from me," I said, looking directly at Dad. "And you know that." Dad opened his mouth to respond, but Sam cut him off. "This isn't about pointing fingers," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "It's about fairness, making sure everyone gets what they need." Fairness? Or control? I was losing it. Sam's expression hardened for a split second before he turned back to Dad. "See what I mean? This kind of tension isn't good for anyone. That's why it's so important to handle this now." After that dinner, I couldn't sit idly by anymore. I started paying closer attention to Sam's moves, and the pattern became clear. He wasn't just advising Dad, he was inserting himself into every decision. He scheduled meetings with Dad's attorney under the guise of helping out. He brought over spreadsheets and folders, presenting them as tools for simplifying the estate, but clearly designed to benefit himself and Katie. One day, I stopped by Dad's house unannounced. Sam was there, as usual, sitting at the dining table with a laptop and a stack of papers. Dad sat across from him, looking exhausted. "What's going on here?" I asked, stepping into the room. Sam didn't even look up. "Just helping Dad organize a few things," he said casually. "You know, estate stuff." Dad gave me a strained smile. "Sam's been a big help lately. I'm not as sharp with all this paperwork as I used to be." I walked over, glancing at the documents on the table. "Have you run any of this by your attorney?" Dad hesitated, and Sam jumped in. "We're just brainstorming right now," he said smoothly. "No need to involve lawyers yet." "That's exactly when you should involve a lawyer," I said, my voice firm. "Dad, you don't need Sam to manage this for you. If you want help, hire a professional." Sam laughed lightly, finally looking up at me. "Always so suspicious." "I'm just looking out for Dad. You should try it sometime." "Looking out for him or yourself?" I shot back. Dad raised a hand, his tone weary. "That's enough. Both of you." The tension at home was one thing, but it wasn't contained. Sam was expanding his influence, using the accusation to turn the family against me and strengthen his position as Dad's trusted advisor. The worst moment came when Dad called me over one evening. I thought it was just to catch up, but as soon as I walked into his study, I saw the familiar stack of papers on his desk. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant, "about how to make sure everything's fair." "Fair," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "What does that mean?" Dad rubbed his temples. "Katie's been struggling. Sam thinks it might be better to shift things around a bit, to make sure she's taken care of." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Dad, you've always said you wanted things to be equal. Why change that now?" He avoided my gaze. "It's not about equality, son. It's about need." "Need?" I said, my voice rising. or manipulation, because that's what this is. Sam and Katie are using you. Dad's face darkened. That's enough. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm not trying to attack you, Dad. I just want you to see what's happening. He shook his head, his tone final. I've made my decision. That night, I realized I couldn't rely on Dad to see through Sam's schemes on his own. Sam was too good at playing the dutiful son while subtly painting me as the antagonist. If I was going to stop him, I needed to find proof, something concrete to expose his true motives. I wasn't going to let him take everything without a fight. The turning point came when I found undeniable inconsistencies in Katie's timeline. It started with an old family calendar I stumbled upon in Dad's attic. Each summer, our activities were meticulously logged: trips, camps, weekends at the lake house. Katie's claim had centered on a specific summer at the lake house, but the calendar made it clear. I hadn't been there. That was the summer I'd spent recovering from an appendix surgery, stuck at home with Aunt Louise. This was the proof I needed. For weeks, I'd been on the defensive, but now I had something concrete to push back with. The next family gathering was tense, as usual. Dad sat at the head of the table, looking older than ever, while Sam held court, steering every conversation back to Katie's supposed strength and resilience. Katie sat quietly, her usual teary-eyed performance in full effect. I let them have their moment. Then, as the plates were being cleared, I stood up. There's something we need to address, I said, my voice steady, but loud enough to command the room's attention. All eyes turned to me. Sam leaned back in his chair, a smug smile on his face. This isn't the time, little brother, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. It's exactly the time, I shot back. I've spent weeks listening to you spread lies about me, and I'm done staying silent. Dad frowned. What are you talking about? I turned to Katie. You claimed that something happened between us during that summer at the lake house. But here's the thing. You know as well as I do that I wasn't even there. Her face went pale, and for a moment, I saw panic flicker in her eyes. That's ridiculous, Sam interjected. You don't get to twist this around. I pulled out the family calendar, placing it on the table for everyone to see. This is from that summer, I said. Every trip, every event, all logged by Dad. And guess what? I spent that summer recovering from surgery, with Aunt Louise, nowhere near the lake house. There was a beat of silence, heavy and oppressive. Dad leaned forward, his brow furrowed as he examined the calendar. Is this true? He asked, his voice quiet but firm. Katie stammered, I don't remember every detail. Trauma can mess with your memory. Convenient, I interrupted, because your memory just happens to crumble the second there's evidence against it. Sam stood, trying to regain control of the situation. Look, Dad, this isn't about exact dates. It's about the fact that Katie has been deeply hurt and needs support. Why can't he just own up to that? Because there's nothing to own up to, I said firmly. This has never been about Katie's well-being. It's been about you and her manipulating Dad to get what you want. Sam's face darkened, his usual smugness replaced by something colder. You think you're so clever, don't you? Trying to turn this around like we're the bad guys. You are the bad guys, I said, my voice rising. You've been playing on Dad's emotions, twisting the truth, and using lies to push me out of the family. But it stops here. For the first time, the family didn't immediately jump to Katie's defense. Instead, they looked to Dad, who was staring at the calendar in silence. Finally, he looked up, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. Katie, why didn't you mention this before? If the timeline doesn't match, how am I supposed to believe the rest of your story? Katie's tears came then, but they felt more desperate than genuine. Dad, I didn't mean to. I don't know what to say. Sam stepped in, his voice low and controlled. She doesn't have to explain herself to him. We're trying to protect her, not put her on trial again. No one's on trial, Dad said, his tone sharper than I'd heard in months. But if what he's saying is true, then I need to reevaluate everything. I can't just ignore this. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Katie retreated into silence, and Sam, for all his composure, seemed rattled. I could feel the shift in the air, subtle but significant. For the first time, the family wasn't blindly accepting their version of events. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Sam and Katie's hold on Dad was weakening, and now I had something I hadn't had in weeks: hope. As I left that night, Dad stopped me at the door. I need time to think, he said. But I'm glad you spoke up. It wasn't forgiveness or resolution, but it was something. And that was enough for now. This is where I am at right now. I am not satisfied with this confrontation yet. I'll think about the next move and keep you updated. Stay tuned. Final update. Hola. Zrenia. It's Ethan again. So, after confronting Sam and Katie, things in the family didn't magically fix themselves. But the cracks in their story were now visible, and I wasn't about to let them patch them up with more lies. I kept my distance for a while, letting the weight of the truth settle in. Sometimes, the best way to fight back isn't with another move. It's by giving people enough rope to hang themselves. The unraveling began sooner than I expected. Katie, who had always relied on the fragility of her victim persona, started slipping. The more people questioned her story, the more inconsistencies came to light. At a family gathering a few weeks later, she made the mistake of elaborating. It wasn't just the lake house, she told Aunt Louise in a hushed tone that wasn't as hushed as she thought. There were other times, too. I just haven't had the strength to talk about them. I caught Louise frowning from across the room. She glanced at me briefly before turning back to Katie. But you told me it happened at the lake house. That was the one place you were certain about, Katie stammered, trying to backtrack. It's hard to keep it all straight. It was a long time ago. My cousin's frown deepened, and she didn't press further, but the damage was done. I knew Louise well enough to know she'd be connecting the dots, and seeing how little sense Katie's claims made. Sam, meanwhile, was too arrogant to realize his control was slipping. He continued to act like the family's savior, pushing harder for changes to Dad's will. But his overreach was starting to work against him. I learned from Dad's attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Taylor, that Sam had been calling her incessantly. He's relentless, she told me over the phone. Keep asking about options to adjust the distribution. Did he ask you to exclude me entirely? I asked, already knowing the answer. There was a pause. Let's just say he's been persuasive about reallocating assets to better support Katie. Of course he has, I muttered. Thanks for letting me know. Ms. Taylor's tone sharpened. For what it's worth, I've worked with your father for years. He's a fair man. I think he's starting to see through their intentions. It was a small reassurance, but enough to push me forward. The real turning point came when Katie and Sam's greed finally outpaced their planning. Sam, emboldened by what he thought was his dominance, pushed Dad to sign a new version of the will. What he didn't realize was that Dad had grown suspicious since the calendar incident. Instead of signing blindly, Dad asked to meet with Ms. Taylor first. At that meeting, Sam showed his hand. He brought Katie along, both of them insisting that the changes were urgent. Katie cried, of course, and Sam spun his usual tale about protecting the family. But Ms. Taylor, sharp as ever, asked one simple question. Why the urgency? Has there been a change in circumstances? Sam faltered, caught off guard. Well, Katie's been struggling, and we want to make sure she's taken care of before things get complicated. Complicated how? Ms. Taylor pressed. Katie started crying harder, but it wasn't enough to distract from the fact that Sam didn't have a real answer. Dad, sitting silently through the exchange, finally spoke. I don't think we need to make any changes right now, he said, his tone calm but firm. I'd like to take some time to review everything. Sam's face hardened, but he couldn't argue without looking suspicious. Katie shot him a panicked look, but he just nodded tightly. They left the meeting empty-handed. When Dad told me about the meeting later, I could see the shift in his demeanor. He wasn't fully on my side yet, but he was starting to question everything. I don't like feeling rushed, he admitted. And Ms. Taylor's right. There's no reason to make hasty decisions. Good, I said, because hasty decisions are exactly what they want. In the weeks that followed, Sam and Katie's desperation became more apparent. They started pushing harder, but their tactics were unraveling. Family members who had once avoided me were now asking questions. Aunt Louise and uncles, even some of the cousins. One by one, they began to see through the facade. The final blow came during another family dinner, one that Sam had insisted on hosting. He'd planned it as a way to bring everyone together, but it quickly turned into his undoing. Midway through the evening, Aunt Louise stood up, clearing her throat. Katie, I have a question, she said, her tone unusually stern. Katie froze. What is it? Louise folded her arms. You've said a lot about what happened, but the more you talk, the less sense it makes. You say it was the lake house, but you've also said it wasn't. And now you're saying there were other times? Which is it? Katie's face went pale. I don't remember everything exactly. Convenient, Louise said. Because I've talked to others, and none of it adds up. Sam jumped in. That's enough. This isn't an interrogation. No, it's not, Louise shot back. But if you're going to accuse someone of something so serious, you'd better have the truth to back it up. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Katie. For the first time, she didn't cry. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, looking like a deer caught in headlights. After that night, Sam and Katie's grip on the family crumbled entirely. Dad, finally recognizing the harm they had caused, took decisive action. Without a word to them, he discreetly removed both Sam and Katie from the will, undoing the manipulative changes Sam had snuck in. He didn't need to confront them. His silent resolve made his stance crystal clear. As for me, I didn't lift a finger. I didn't need to. Their desperation, lies, and greed did all the work for me. They isolated themselves, leaving behind nothing but the chaos they created. Karma handled the rest. In the end, I walked away with my integrity intact, and my family finally beginning to rebuild trust in me. The inheritance? That was irrelevant. What mattered was that the truth was out, and Sam and Katie had no one to blame but themselves.